And welcome to another edition of DATELINE Morton Grove. I'm your host, Shel Marcus, and again, so happy to have you with us here this evening. Over the years, we've always had interesting individuals, residents of Morton Grove, businessmen of Morton Grove, speaking about their hobbies, about their businesses. It's always been fascinating for me, and I hope for you, to find out more and more information about people who live here in Morton Grove. Well, tonight's show is no exception. We have a gentleman who's been with us before. It's another repeat performance. We have so much fun with him. He's such a wonderful guest. He brings such a wealth of information that we think you'll enjoy hearing from him once again. Our special guest tonight, radio historian Chuck Schaden, talking about how radio played such an important role in our lives before television. We'll be back with our special guest after this brief word, so don't go away.
Why is it when the cowboy rides off into the sunset, it's always the end? Maybe it's because too much sun can lead to melanoma skin cancer. Examine yourself regularly and see your dermatologist.
Surprisingly, over a lifetime, your child is in less danger being out in the water than out in the sun. One out of 5 Americans develop skin cancer. Don't let your child be the one.
And welcome back again, DATELINE Morton Grove. Your host, Shel Marcus, with again a repeat performance by another good friend and a resident of Morton Grove, Chuck Schaden. Chuck?
Shel.
Welcome back again.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. It's like the old days of radio. They did a repeat broadcast for the West Coast, you know.
This is similar to that.
It's not a repeat, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you again. This is, I think, your third time on the show.
Yes.
We're going to start calling this DATELINE Morton Grove with Shel Marcus and Chuck Schaden.
We'll have to start paying.
Or Chuck Schaden. Well, paying. Wait a second. That's
Hold it.
Hold it. You'll get half of what I get. How's that sound?
That's fine.
That's fine. That's very, very good. But I am really genuinely pleased to have you here.
Thank you.
Because you bring such a, as I say, a wealth of information about something that I enjoy so much talking about, and of course you enjoy talking about, and that's radio, particularly old-time radio.
Right.
And tonight's show, I thought we would, in the past we've talked about serials, radio serials, we talked about comedy shows, but radio really had a tremendous impact on all of our lives, because it was the form of communication that all of us used to just sit around these big radios, and this is a small one, but we really had a big, big radio. It was the form of entertainment that most families got together, and this was the way that they communicate what was going on in the outside world.
You used to have what they call the console radio. This is a table model. But the console radio was maybe 2 or 3 feet wide and maybe 4 or 5 feet high.
It was a piece of furniture.
It was a piece of furniture indeed, and in fact it had an honored place in the living room, generally speaking, because that's where the family would gather and listen to all kinds of entertainment shows, music programs, sporting events, and news. And through all what is called or referred to as the golden age of radio, which is probably the shortest golden age of any that ever came around, probably 1935 to 1950.
Just 15 years?
Yeah, you could stretch it a little earlier in the 30s, and a little later in the 50s you could go to 55, maybe even into early 60 a little bit, but by that time radio was really changing a lot.
I didn't realize it was that short of a period.
It was, yeah.
When you think of all the things that radio, I mean, like television today came about when 48, 49, when it first came on the scene.
48 and 49 was about where it started.
Well, is the reason that radio had such a short span because there wasn't much more that they could do with radio outside of the shows and the concept, while in television you had technological changes?
No. The reason the radio was short-lived was because of television.
Oh, really?
Television and the fact that the people who operated the radio stations became the same people who operated the television stations. And the new technology and the new thing, they poured all the money that they were making out of radio into television and changed radio. They didn't want to spend any money for original comedy, original drama, original broadcast. They didn't want to spend the money for the writers. They were putting it all into television. And television was very expensive because you had to worry about the pictures. Radio, you didn't have to worry about the pictures. The listener provided the picture. But with television, you had to give the listener the picture. And that meant sets, and it meant lots of money for all of that sort of thing.
And so that was the reason that...
So the networks basically abandoned radio and moved into television. But the sponsors did the same thing. The sponsors left radio in droves to go to television, and the audiences did pretty much the same thing. I mean, can you imagine if you go way back before that? Before radio, home entertainment was a piano or a phonograph, a Victrola, wind-up Victrola. Now all of a sudden they invent radio, and you get a radio like this, or a crystal set with the headphones.
Mm-hmm.
You start listening to sounds coming from a distance into your home, and you're absolutely fascinated. Just say, my gosh, what is this? And you know what? The dust started appearing on the piano, and dust appeared on those 78 RPM phonograph records and on the big speaker from the Victrola. Everybody was going to radio. Now we have 15, 20 years of wonderful radio entertainment. State of the art. They could do anything on radio. And television comes on the scene, and now what do we have? We have a picture in the living room. A picture in the living room, you know. And so those of us who were listening to radio started watching television.
That picture was very small.
It was a small, might have been a 3-inch picture, you know, or a 5-inch or a 7-inch.
My wife was telling me that the first picture tube they had one of those big bubble screens in front of it.
Oh, to magnify it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a 7-inch, but with the bubble, it was like about a 16-inch.
Right.
Yeah.
But you had to look at it dead on then.
Right, because if you
were on the side,
if you look on the side,
distorted.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. But that you're absolutely. I never realized that it had that kind of an impact. But you're absolutely right. When the money was pulled back, the investment for the creativity, and given over to the television medium, radio just was on its last days. And many of those.
Well, it changed. Radio changed then. They went to economics radio, meaning. What it would cost to produce a Jack Benny show on radio, you can imagine you put a disc jockey in there with a stack of records for 4 hours. It wouldn't. What does it cost you? You get the records for free, and the disc jockey's on the payroll for low money.
But those 15 years, if we said 1935 to 1950, let's use that as a benchmark. Those 15 years probably had some of the most memorable events that have taken place in this century that only radio could capture those events.
Well, radio could have, in that period of time, radio was the only one who could have been there on the spot. I mean, if you didn't get your news from radio, where did you get your news? You got your news from the newspaper, right?
Right.
Or you may have gone to the movies and watched the newsreel. The newsreel was way lagging behind.
Right.
The newspaper, in those days, the newspapers would put out extras. They'd put out an extra edition of the newspaper, replating the front page with whatever updated information there may have been. But it would still take some time from the event itself till they got the story written and set in type and put on the press, and a decision made to put out an extra edition, and then you had to distribute. And where would an extra edition be distributed? When you were a kid, you probably got the Chicago's American delivered to your door, or the Daily News, or the Tribune, or whatever it was. Right. But you got that in the morning or in the late afternoon. You weren't going to get an extra edition. They weren't going to deliver an extra to you, so the extra edition would come out downtown, or maybe to some of the newsstands in the near-in sections of the city.
They used to have an early edition that would come out, I think the Tribune had one sometimes too, used to come out at 5 o'clock, which was nothing more than the rehash of the morning news.
Right.
And so that it really wasn't,
Right.
I mean, it really wasn't an up-to-date kind of situation. Because
But if something was happening, some news, if there was news of an explosion or something someplace, or whatever news-making event, radio could have it almost instantly.
well, the example, and of course I go back to the example of the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg Explosion, that event, which was announced by an Illinois individual.
WLS engineer Herb Morrison, announcer Herb Morrison.
He was at the site.
He was there at Lakehurst, New Jersey, to record on a transcription disc the arrival of the Hindenburg from Germany. And he was there they were just kind of seeing how they were going to do a recording of such a special event. And it was an event that the Hindenburg was coming, and they were there. And there were some newsreel cameramen there as well. And then all of a sudden it exploded. And he was just doing a workmanlike description of the scene, that it was coming towards the mooring mast and all of this sort of thing, and then it exploded. And so he started covering it. This was not being broadcast yet. He started covering it, and it was being recorded. Now, the newsreels were recording it too, because they were there watching this dirigible come floating in. But he got the recording, he finished it. They took the recording from Lakehurst, New Jersey, came back to Chicago, and put it on the air the next morning. There was no live coverage of this, and also the newsreels who had it, you know, it would take a week or more to get it into the theaters, because if that newsreel was going to be shown in 200 theaters, they had to strike 200 prints. So radio with its, and that was not even live radio. That was, see, the first news event that was broadcast on radio was way before the 1935. It was the Harding-Cox election.
You mentioned that earlier this evening, and I don't even remember that, but obviously I wasn't around then.
Well, you may not have been around, but you weren't around.
No.
But that was the first, and they were just giving election returns.
They were just giving the tallies.
Right.
And that was the first time radio. Was that nationwide, or was it at that point where?
Well, it came out of KDKA in Pittsburgh.
And of course,
which was the first station that went on the air. It was 76 years ago now.
Just amazing. But radio had a tremendous influence not only in terms of the communication to the family of those special events. Politically, it was probably the right-hand tool of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
He started the Fireside Chats,
I was just going to
which was a radio broadcast. He used that very early in his first administration, and he would talk to the public. And the public would listen. I mean, the people were glued to the radio, listening to the president. I mean, before that, they had hardly ever had an opportunity to listen to the president, except when he was making a big speech or something like that. You'd see him in the newsreels. You'd see photos of him in the newspaper. You'd see text printed. But here is a man whose first inauguration speech was covered on radio. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. In the Depression.
Right.
And then he knew the value of communications, and so he would regularly be on the radio.
No question. He was
all along the line. And of course his subsequent inaugural speeches were covered on radio, and the Democratic and the Republican conventions were covered on radio.
It was the first time that the public had a chance really to hear the politicians, so to speak, at that time. Well, we're going to talk more about how radio's had impact on the early lives, especially in the 40s with World War II breaking out, and at some of the great sporting events which were covered on radio. We'll talk about that. We'll be back after this brief word, so don't go away. We'll have much more to talk about. Old Time Radio with our special guest, Chuck Schaden, radio historian.
This year, more than 2 million high school students will receive something very important. Something only a high school education can provide. The opportunity to become a United States Marine. Don't throw your education away. For more information, call now. There will always be honor. There will always be courage. There will always be commitment. There will always be pride. And there will always be a need for those who make sure it is so. Maybe you have what it takes to be one of us, the few, the proud, the Marines.
And we're back again. Dateline Morton Grove, your host, Shel Marcus, with our very special guest, Chuck Schaden, radio historian. And Chuck, again, I'm really enjoying this.
Thanks.
I hope the people out there are enjoying this kind of report and review about radio as much as I am, because you are such a fountainhead of information. But this comes with the long line of your involvement in old-time radio, doesn't it? I mean...
Well, I've been broadcasting since 1970. 28 plus years now with the old-time radio shows, and I've played all kinds of radio shows on the air on my Saturday broadcast on WNIB. We've played comedy shows and mysteries and dramas and big band remotes, and that's a thing we ought to talk about sometime. And news broadcasts and all of that. In fact, I did a 4-year-long retrospective of World War II, going day and date from December 7th of 1991, covering December 7th of 1941, and 50 years for the full 4 years of the war, playing all of the coverage of all the events, including D-Day and the Pearl Harbor and everything.
You know, I notice also you're wearing a little radio lapel pin or something. Is that symbolic? Is that just
It's
something?
symbolic of my interest in old-time radio, although I was inducted happily and very pleasantly into the Radio Hall of Fame in 1993.
That's quite an honor. I don't think many people realize that there are not that many people that have been inducted to the Hall of Fame.
Well, I'm very pleased and very honored to have been able to...
Who are some of the other names that have been inducted in the Hall of Fame?
Well, Jack Benny and Edgar Bergen and Fibber McGee and Molly and Lowell Thomas and Paul Harvey and many others.
Wonderful company.
I'm very, very honored, yeah.
And this all takes place, you know, the Museum of Broadcast is at the old Chicago Public Library.
It's at the former Chicago Public Library building. It's the Chicago Cultural Center now, and it's on Michigan Avenue between Randolph and Washington. And we have a wonderful, wonderful museum there, and people can come in and see and be reminded of all the old radio shows and the television programming. You can come in and see our program every Saturday. We broadcast it live from the museum from 1 until 5. And you can visit Jack Benny's Vault exhibit and Fibber McGee and Molly's Hall Closet exhibit. You can see Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd there. You can go into the television. They have a television studio there, and you can become a TV anchorman.
A Walter Cronkite.
You can do it all. You can be a Huntley and Brinkley or a Tom Brokaw or whatever.
Whatever, yeah.
And you get a chance for your 15 minutes worth of fame, and they'll give you a script and the teleprompter and the inserts, and Tom Skilling will do the weather, and you can go home with a videotape of it if you choose to.
And now this is, there's no admission charge to come.
No admission charge to the museum. It's absolutely free, and it's open 7 days a week, Monday through Saturday from 10 until 4:30, and Sunday from noon to 5. And generally speaking, on the second Sunday of every month at the museum, the second Sunday of every month at 2 o'clock, a group of performers come in and reenact old-time radio shows. They work with the scripts in their hands, the sound effects equipment, the technicians, and they give you the idea of what it would have been like if you had been into a radio studio when a live show was going on back in the 40s or the 50s. And they do reenactments of Gangbusters and R. Miss Brooks and the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet and the Bickersons and
That's wonderful.
Gunsmoke.
So this is, for anybody who's interested, it's a wonderful way to spend the time, to visit, to bring the family. I know it's a great reference source for a lot of people who would like to go and research things about
Absolutely.
television.
You can listen to hundreds of radio shows, watch hundreds of TV shows, not all at once, but you can. There's a study area, and it's wonderful.
And that's one of the things about this city that is so great, and its citizens make it so different and so unique. And of course, you're a special kind of person, and we really, again, thank you for being with us as we
I'm
continue
happy to be.
on.
I always talk about radio. I love to talk about radio.
Well, and I enjoy listening to and talking with you, and we hope that the audience is having as much fun as we are talking about old-time radio. When we talk about the 40s, as we said just before we had the break, when America went into the war, radio played obviously a very important role there.
Well, that's when radio came of age as far as news is concerned. probably in the late 30s when Europe started the war, when the war started in Europe. Before then, radio wasn't much as far as delivering news is concerned, special events and things.
It's basically an entertainment.
Mostly entertainment. And a lot of the news in the early days of radio was simply rip and read from the newspapers. I mean, they took the newspaper and they rewrote it, or maybe didn't even rewrite it, and they just read it over the radio. But now, with the onset of World War II, the networks would send correspondents into Europe and all around, into the Pacific. And they would be filing reports by shortwave, live reports by shortwave. They would write up their stuff, they would telegraph it so that the news editor back in the States would know what he was going to say, but then they delivered their reports live from literally the four corners of the globe during the war. And they brought an immediacy to the war. They brought it right directly to the people at home. They could describe all of the things. Now, you could get your daily newspapers and you would see pictures of the action, because newspapers had war correspondents and war photographers over there. But everything you saw was after the fact.
Is this where Ed Murrow?
Ed Murrow broadcast from London before and during World War II. "This is London," he would say in that great Edward R. Murrow voice of his, and he would be on the top of some building.
Bombs going off,
describing the bombs falling over here and the bombs falling.
Only radio could really capture that. Of course,
a word picture.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And of course, President Roosevelt with his famous speech declaring war after the sad Pearl Harbor.
On the 8th of December, and before a joint session of Congress
that
right.
would live. And of course,
Day of Infamy speech.
That Day of Infamy speech, and from that point, right until the signing of on the Missouri. I remember that incident as well as a youngster. And that'll never leave your mind when you listen to those kinds.
Well, we had it all. We had the drama that radio brought into our homes during World War II has never been equaled. Because first of all, we were all in it. During World War II, you were either fighting the war on the battlefield or you were fighting the war at home. And we listened to the news. I mean, almost every family, virtually every family, had somebody in the service. So we were all keenly aware of what was going on. And we were interested in what was going on. And when Jimmy Doolittle went over in early in 1942 and bombed Tokyo, I mean, you know, it was great. It wasn't really much from a strategic point of view, but from a morale building thing, it was great. We got back at those people, and all of that sort of thing. And so it was an amazing thing. But we heard all of the things that were going on. D-Day, I mean, when D-Day came on the 6th of June in 1944, it was covered extensively on radio.
And a lot of shortwave at that time too.
A lot of shortwave stuff coming back. Yeah. And then, of course, the next big major event that radio covered was the death of FDR.
That's right.
And just weeks before the Germans surrendered. And then you heard President Truman announcing the surrender of Germany.
It was like the whole circle, the whole wide circle. And how could anyone forget to change for a moment about all that political input, about the great sport events that were covered by radio? I mean, I couldn't, as a youngster, and I think I mentioned to you, when Joe Louis was fighting, everybody used to have the radio on listening to the Joe Louis championship fights. Bobby Thompson's home run. I was on an elevated downtown going to Chicago, an elevated train, when that home run happened in Bobby Thompson. The Lou Gehrig speech, Babe Ruth spoke, all those kinds of things just brought radio right next to you in a sense that you never realized that you were not there, but then you were there.
Well, see, the newsreels and the newspapers covered those events, but you got it later. With radio, you got it on the spot.
That's true. That's true.
When it happened, you heard it as it was happening.
You know, we could spend literally hours. I said to you, you could come on this show for at least an hour a month, and we could never even, I think, scratch the surface of the depth of what radio has meant in this century.
Absolutely.
And it was amazing that it happened in such a short period of time. You've brought it home to me about what an impact it made in such a short period of time. I wish we had more time, but I see that our time is up. Chuck, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We'll be back with a few closing comments after this brief word, so please don't go away. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Within every group of honest professionals, occasionally there's someone who isn't. But how do you find out who they are? A free nationwide information network that lets you check on the background of a profession's members would help. Fortunately, the stock brokerage profession has created just such a network. We can't tell you there haven't been occasional problems in our industry, but we can tell you who they are. The National Association of Securities Dealers.
Around here, the ground is hard. Around here, the goal's farther away. The dreams are still dreamed. That's why Special Olympics is here, helping people with mental retardation become athletes, helping athletes become respected, accepted. And you can help too. As an athlete, a coach, a volunteer, Special Olympics is training for life. And that means a lot around here.
And we're back again with Dateline Morton Grove, your host, Shel Marcus. Again, I want to thank our very, very special guest, Chuck. Again, thank you so much. Chuck Schaden, radio historian, citizen, Morton Grove, on par with Jack Benny and as a Hall of Famer and things of that nature. It's just been a pleasure to have you here, and we are really blessed. You have brought so much joy to so many people. I don't know if you really realize the kind of joy you brought to a lot of people just by your avocation style vocation. You must get as much joy out of doing it as...
I do, except I have one problem. I no longer have a hobby. See?
That's right.
It started as a hobby, and now I made it...
Your hobby is your vocation.
Yeah,
you know?
So I need a hobby.
That's the best of all worlds. It's the best of all worlds. Thank you again for coming.
You're welcome.
Hopefully we'll have you back again talking about the big band. I'd love to do that, talk about the big band. So this again is Shel Marcus with Dateline Morton Grove. Thanking you all for watching us tonight. I want to particularly thank Tony Micheletto and the entire staff of MediaOne for all their help in the set and all their help in putting the show on. We couldn't do it without them. They've been just super, as has MediaOne. So until I see you again, have a very, very good evening and be kind to each other. Shel Marcus saying good night.
I'm Gates McFadden.
And I'm Michael Dorn.
On Star Trek The Next Generation, I play Dr. Beverly Crusher.
Computer, emergency entry, Chief Medical Officer Beverly Crusher.
And I play Worf, the Klingon.
Worf to Enterprise.
Go ahead, sir.
Beam me up.
Our movie's special effects are light years ahead of the original televised Star Trek. But we both share the same vision of the future, where education and advancing technology have dramatically improved human and alien life throughout the galaxies.
Education can improve your life, too. You'll have a positive future filled with opportunities. So stay in school and graduate.
Engage.
This message brought to you by the U.S. Air Force, because we know the value of a good education.
Get between your kids and drugs any way you can if you want to save the kid's life.
I sat my son down, explained it to him, simple, uncomplicated.
I didn't know what he was talking about. He was nervous and sweating.
If you need help talking to your kids about drugs, call for this free book.